Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. In Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 1 through 9, Moses presents a strange yet very specific scenario involving what to do in the case of a murder where the guilty party remains unknown. Like the law of God, Moses was leaving few, if any, loopholes that would allow the Israelites to permit sin to remain in the camp. In this particular circumstance, while the name of the guilty party was not known, the guilt of their crime remained. And because God viewed the Israelites communally, he held the entire nation responsible for the crime committed. Atonement must be made, justice must be served, and just because the identity of the murderer remained a mystery, it didn't relieve the condemnation the crime had brought upon the people of God. One man's sin had contaminated the entire body, and it was up to them to rectify the situation by doing what was right in God's eyes, by purging the sin from their midst. If in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess, someone is found slain, lying in the open country, and it's not known who killed him, then your elders and your judges shall come out, and they shall measure the distance to the surrounding cities. And the elders of the city that is nearest to the slain man shall take a heifer that has never been worked and that is not pulled in a yoke. And the elders of that city shall bring the heifer down to a valley with running water, which is neither plowed nor sown, and shall break the heifer's neck there in the valley. Then the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come forward, for the Lord your God has chosen them to minister to him, and to bless in the name of the Lord. And by their word every dispute and every assault shall be settled. And all the elders of that city nearest to the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer, whose neck was broken in the valley. And they shall testify, Our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it shed. Accept atonement, O Lord, for your people Israel, whom you have redeemed. And do not set the guilt of innocent blood in the midst of your people Israel, so that their blood guilt be atoned for. So you shall purge the guilt of innocent blood from your midst, when you do what is right in the sight of the Lord. Deuteronomy 21, verses 1 through 9. The opening of this chapter sounds like the beginning of an Agatha Christie murder mystery. A traveler walking across open land inadvertently discovers the body of an unidentified dead man. The only evidence we're given is that the man has been murdered. There are no other clues provided as to the identity of the deceased or his killer. Cue Hercule Poirot or Miss Marple. But unlike one of Miss Christie's novels, this story seems less focused on discovering the identity of the murderer than expunging the guilt of his actions. While everything in us screams for the guilty party to be exposed and justice to be served, God seems much more concerned about the corporate character of his people. An innocent life has been taken, and God is going to hold the entire community responsible. Yes, one man had sinned, but all would be culpable for his actions. This idea of corporate culpability was one of the differentiating characteristics of God's people. He viewed the Israelites communally and not just individually. They were his chosen people collectively, not independently. They jointly shared his unique designation of them as his treasured possession, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. See Exodus 19, verses 5 through 6. And all it took was one bad apple to spoil the bunch. A single man's sin could contaminate the entire nation, replacing the blessings of God with his just and righteous judgment. We'll see this played out in the early days of Israel's conquest of the land. In just their second battle, the Israelites will discover just how serious God was about corporate culpability. After their miraculous defeat of Jericho, God had commanded the Israelites to destroy everything within the city's walls, taking nothing as plunder. Do not take any of the things set apart for destruction, or you yourselves will be completely destroyed, and you will bring trouble on the camp of Israel. Everything made from silver, gold, bronze, or iron is sacred to the Lord and must be brought into his treasury. Joshua 6, verses 18 through 19. And it seems that the people did as the Lord commanded. Then the Israelites burned the town and everything in it. Only the things made from silver, gold, bronze, or iron were kept for the treasury of the Lord's house. Joshua 6, verse 24. But then we come to chapter 7. But Israel violated the instructions about the things set apart for the Lord. A man named Achan had stolen some of these dedicated things, so the Lord was very angry with the Israelites. Joshua 7, verse 1. Don't miss the significance of this verse. One man, Achan, violated God's command, and yet the entire nation would be held responsible. Achan's sin was unknown to Joshua and the rest of the camp. So they planned their next conquest, setting their sights on the small town of Ai, assuming it would be a quick and easy victory. But to Israel's shock and dismay, the much smaller army of Ai routed them. The men of Ai chased the Israelites from the town gate as far as the quarries, and they killed about 36 who were retreating down the slope. The Israelites were paralyzed with fear at this turn of events, and their courage melted away. Joshua 7, verses 4 through 5. Joshua and the rest of the people were at a loss as to why any of this had happened. They couldn't understand how they had gone from victory to defeat so quickly. But God would not leave them in the dark for long. Israel has sinned and broken my covenant. They have stolen some of the things that I commanded must be set apart for me, and they have not only stolen them, but have lied about it, and hidden the things among their own belongings. That is why the Israelites are running from their enemies in defeat. For now Israel itself has been set apart for destruction. Joshua 7, verses 11 through 12. And God revealed to Joshua the nature of their problem. Hidden among you, O Israel, are things set apart for the Lord. You will never defeat your enemies until you remove these things from among you. Joshua 7, verse 13. Achan was eventually exposed and punished for his sin, but his individual actions had impacted the entire community. The whole nation had suffered because of his decision to disobey God. So now, when we read in Deuteronomy chapter 21 of God holding an entire city responsible for the blood guilt of an innocent man's death, we can see what's going on. Discovering the identity of the murderer was less important than atoning for the sin committed. The victim's death had left a stain on the entire nation. God didn't institute a plan for discovering the identity of the murderer. He didn't form a posse or assemble a militia to seek out the guilty party. He provided a plan of atonement, a means by which the nation could receive forgiveness for the sin committed in its midst. Once it was determined which city was nearest the location where the dead man's body was found, the elders and priests of that city were given explicit instructions to follow. They were to find a young cow that had never been used for plowing and take it into a nearby valley where its neck was to be broken. This young heifer was to serve as a substitute for the one guilty of the murder. Its life was to be given in exchange for the life of the one who had shed innocent blood. And the elders of that city were to wash their hands over the body of the heifer, pronouncing the innocence of the people and crying for God to accept their gift as atonement for the sin committed. Our hands have not spilled this blood, nor have we witnessed the crime. Do not blame your people Israel, whom you redeemed, O Lord, and do not hold them accountable for the bloodshed of an innocent person. Deuteronomy 21, verses 7 through 8. And Moses clearly states, Then atonement will be made for the bloodshed. In this manner you will purge out the guilt of innocent blood from among you. You must do what is right before the Lord. Deuteronomy 21, verses 8 through 9. It should be noted that God's instructions concerning the atoning sacrifice are quite specific. The location for the sacrifice was to be a valley with running water, which is neither plowed nor sown. Deuteronomy 21, verse 5. The sacrifice was to take place outside the walls of the city, at a location where there was running water nearby, necessary for ceremonial cleansing once the animal was killed and its blood was shed. The requirement that the ground be unplowed seems to be an assurance that the shed blood never be stirred up and contaminate a future food source. God's primary concern was the restoration of Israel's relationship with Him. As long as the innocent victim's life was unatoned for, the entire nation stood guilty and condemned before God. The name of the one who committed the murder was unknown, but the guilt of his actions was more than familiar. The sin of the one contaminated the whole, and God expected them to purge the guilt from their midst. The sin of Achan brought judgment upon the people of Israel. His selfish and self-centered disregard for God's command had far-reaching implications and serious ramifications. God would not allow the people of Israel to turn a blind eye to the sin in their midst. It was to be taken seriously because its influence was deadly. There is a powerful and sobering lesson for us to learn from all of this. God puts a high priority on community. As followers of Christ, we have been placed in God's family. We are brothers and sisters in Christ and share a common identity as God's children. And while each of us must take responsibility for our individual actions, we share a communal connection that should make the sins of the one a concern for us all.